Welcome to Biology Minds. Today we're going to talk about cells. Cells play a major part in high school biology or living environment. You may have heard of them in the past in middle school, but we tend to go further in depth with them. We talk more about the cell membrane and the purpose of each organelle. Now, one thing you need to know is that there are two different cell types. So when we talk about cell types, you need to understand that there are prokaryotes and there are eukaryotes, or prokaryotic cells or eukaryotic cells. Now, prokaryotic cells are cells that do not have a nuclear membrane around their genetic material, whether it's DNA or it's RNA. This genetic material is just floating around in the cytoplasm. When we typically talk about cells or think about cells, we're thinking about the eukaryotic cells, the ones that we see in textbooks, we see on posters in our science classroom. Okay, those are our eukaryotic cells, or eukaryotes. And they have a membrane around their genetic material. They have that nucleus that we talk about. And I typically tell students, all right, those are our regular cells. Now, that's not a scientific term. That's just when you think about plant cells or animal cells or the cells that you see on the posters in your science classroom, all right, those are eukaryotic cells. Now, some vocab that you should know is unicellular versus multicellular. Unicellular, okay, uni meaning one. Unicellular organisms are made up of a single cell, just one cell. And that's like bacteria or other microbes. And multicellular, okay, these are the organisms that you typically think of when someone says name an organism, because you think of plants, you think of animals, you think of complex organisms. So these are our complex organisms, the multicellular organisms. We are multicellular organisms. Now, some organelles that you definitely want to know. Okay, you're going to want to know about the cell membrane. Okay, on the outside right here. Right, that's keeping everything inside the cytoplasm, which is this fluid in here. Okay, that's the cytoplasm that the organelles are sitting in. Okay, and the major one, all right, I like to think of it as kind of the brain of the cell. Okay, obviously the cell doesn't have a brain. We're multicellular and we have brain cells, but the nucleus is going to be the control center. Okay, it's the control center of the cell, and it contains genetic material, and it's really going to orchestrate or dictate what's going on within the cell. Very important. Okay, time and time again on the regents, on the final exams, they ask about the nucleus. They expect you to know what the nucleus is, what it does. It's the control center. Okay, it controls and it orchestrates everything that's going on in that cell. Another important one, right, specifically when we talk about animals, humans, talk about mitochondria. Okay, and it's important because it's responsible for making our energy, taking that glucose, breaking it down into ATP so that it's a usable form of energy. Right, that glucose is no good unless we break it down into ATP. That's the form of energy that the cell can actually use. Now, on the regents, they typically make it very simple to draw like a bean shape. Okay, and then they draw these lines which are cystae. You don't necessarily have to know that they're cystae or that term, but you have to know that that simple drawing is typically mitochondria. Okay, this drawing right here, that means mitochondria. And what they want you to know is that it's the powerhouse of the cell. It's responsible for making the energy available to a cell so that the cell can do a number of things, active transport, okay, whatever that cell needs energy for. Without mitochondria, it can't really do much. The endoplasmic reticulum is important. Okay, it transports materials throughout the cell. Ribosomes, okay, conduct protein synthesis. They're going to make proteins. All right, so this synthesis means building, or I tell students making. Okay, so if you ever see this word synthesis, all right, it means making or building. So when we say protein synthesis, that's making proteins. And we make proteins. If you've seen our last video, I told you about this. Make proteins out of amino acids. And it's important that you know this because we're going to talk about it more and more throughout the year. We're going to talk about DNA, the role that it plays in making proteins, okay, protein synthesis. So just keep that in mind. Now, there are two types of endoplasmic reticulum. We talk about the rough endoplasmic reticulum. This has ribosomes on it, and the ribosomes that make these proteins, okay, they're going to put them in the endoplasmic reticulum, and it's going to transport it throughout the cell wherever they need to go. The other type of endoplasmic reticulum is smooth, and it synthesizes and transports lipids. All right, one example is steroids, okay, certain types of hormones. They're going to synthesize or make those lipids and transport them throughout the cell wherever they need to go. So we have rough endoplasmic reticulum for proteins, smooth endoplasmic reticulum for lipids. Now we have vacuoles, okay, stores materials, okay, anything that that cell wants to hold on to for later, okay, maybe nutrients that it's not ready to break down just yet. We have that vacuole for that. Golgi apparatus. Okay, students also often get tripped up when they hear Golgi complex or they hear Golgi body. We're talking about the same thing. So if you hear Golgi and some other word following it, or sometimes we'll just say Golgi. All right, Golgi apparatus, Golgi complex, Golgi body. We're all talking about the same thing, and that's responsible for packaging and transporting materials throughout the cell. So it's going to package it up, and it's going to send it wherever it has to go. Lysosomes are part of this Golgi apparatus, okay, and they contain digestive enzymes. You learned about enzymes. Enzymes are responsible for breaking things down often. And sometimes they build things up. Cell membrane. We're going to talk more about this later as we talk about the phospholipid bilayer. But you want to know that cell membrane, all right, that's that outer part of a cell. So when we draw a typical cell, you're going to see that outside part. Maybe you'll see a nucleus. Maybe we'll draw some little organelles, all right? And that's this. That is that cell membrane. And sometimes they call it the plasma membrane, but we're talking about the same thing. It is selectively or semi-permeable, meaning that some things can flow in and out of it, but not all things, only specifically. Water can flow freely in and out of it, typically, but it will not allow for an infinite amount of water to go in or out. So it is selectively or semi-permeable. Only certain things and a certain amount of each molecule is allowed in or out. Right? Controls and regulates what goes into and what comes out of the cell. Very important. We're going to talk more about that when we talk about diffusion and osmosis. So here's maybe a typical cell. Okay, not all cells look the same. As you know, we have in the human body, we have all sorts of cells. We have red blood cells, white blood cells, liver cells, heart cells, brain cells. Okay, but this is what we show you in science is just a typical cell. Okay, some cells have more mitochondria than other cells. Some might have more endoplasmic reticulum than others, so it really depends on the cell, but this is the depiction that we typically see on the poster in our science classroom, and we just want to go over that. We know that this is the cell membrane, this is the nucleus, okay, inside we have a nucleolus, mitochondria, these are endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi body or Golgi apparatus. Okay, we have in this one it shows us centrioles. Okay, that's only found in animal cells. So this right here is a normal or typical depiction of an animal cell. Cytoplasm, spoke about that earlier, that's just the watery fluid between the nucleus and the cell membrane where all those organisms are floating around in. Now, some things are only found in plant cells, and they want you to understand that in plant cells, these organisms, or organelles, I'm sorry, we find in plant cells, but we will never find them in animal cells. The cell wall. So on top of, not only does a plant cell have the cell membrane, which animal cells have too, they both have cell membranes, but plant cells also have cell walls. Okay, adds a little support to them. Okay, helps protect them, and it's made of cellulose. Talk more about that in the future. Also, chloroplasts, all right, performs photosynthesis so that there's energy that can now go to mitochondria. So in plants, they make their own energy, and then they have to be able to use that energy. In animals, they're going to consume that source of energy, and then the mitochondria have to make it available to that cell. So chloroplasts are another one, only in plant cells. And another thing might be important to know that plant cells have larger vacuoles. So sometimes if you look at a plant cell model or depiction, you're going to see that their vacuoles are very large. That's typical of a plant cell, where animal cells have much smaller vacuoles. Okay, this is a typical depiction of a plant cell. They show you this big vacuole, and then it's still going to have some of the other things we talked about. Going to have the ribosomes on that rough endoplasmic reticulum, and we're going to have our nucleus or nucleolus. We're still going to have the cell membrane, but outside of that cell membrane, we're also going to have our cell wall, and we'll have our Golgi apparatus. And now only in plants will have chloroplasts. These are our chloroplasts, but we'll still have mitochondria in both. And in animal cells, we have centrioles. Now, it might not be too important right now, but you want to know that animal cells have centrioles, plants do not have centrioles. And we'll get more into that in the future when we talk about mitosis and meiosis. So, to sum it up, what we talked about today is cells. You want to know prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. You want to know unicellular versus multicellular. Not that they're very hard to understand, but if you don't know that vocabulary and you go to take a quiz or a test or your regents and they throw that in there to throw you off, then you're not going to be able to answer the question, even though it might be a rather simple question. You're also going to want to know the organelles, nucleus, very important, control center. You're also going to want to know about mitochondria, cell membrane, and the various other organelles. That's all for Biology Minds. Have a good day.